Okay, hey everyone, I'm going to go ahead and talk through this infographic assignment with you as well as I can. Essentially what Stephen has asked us to do, as you can see here on the right of the screen, is to come up with an infographic or a visual representation of multiple data visualizations or graphs or plots. And the utility of that is essentially to give easily digestible information for clients, especially in terms of how we communicate with them and how we make things understandable so that they see the utility in it. And so I'll go ahead and get started with the code, and then I can show you some of the features of the infographic as we go. So before we get started, I found this really great reset graphic device. I know that when I got kind of down to the end of making these graphs, especially with like my histogram, I was getting some errors when I was rerunning the data after I had already run it. And so one of the solutions that I found is this dev off. And essentially what it does is it clears that plot space and resets the graphic device so that it completes a new graph without any previous knowledge every time. So I'll go ahead and show you when I run that. Everything disappears, which seems terrible, but it's so that we have a fresh slate to start with. And I go ahead and get rid of that space down there as well. So let's shrink this and give you a little more room to see. So first what we want to do is we want to open our data set, it's labeled QRPEL. As you can see, here is the syntax to do that. It's this file here. Another way to go about it would be to go to Files, and you could open up the existing data set there, or even import it if you go to this top tab up here. So let's go ahead and get started. So I have this line just because this is really where it begins. These are kind of optional things that you can use. So I went ahead, and this is not going to make a lot of sense to a lot of you, but I went ahead and put a title on my infographic just so that it had some sort of explanation as to how these graphs are related to one another. And so this is the syntax for that, and you essentially make an old parameter and then you push this information into it, and this no read only essentially it gives room for a parameter, and then the parameter we're using, this parameter OMA, it's the outer margin is OMA, and then the C with the parentheses is the sizing that we're using for that outer margin. And essentially, if you see this black box here, it's like shrinking everything within it so that we have a border around it. And so what I did here was I used 3 as the size that I wanted to shrink down from the top. So just for some reference, they usually label 1. So this first 0, 1 is for the bottom of a pane. The second one is for here. The third one is for the top, which is why it's the title. It's the one that has the 3. And then the fourth side is this side here. So anytime you see this array of 4 numbers in a row, especially when it has to do with margins, that's what it means. And so you'll go ahead and think, bottom, left, top, right, like it goes around the box of the thing that you're working on. So I just went ahead and put some space up at the top so that if I wanted to title it later so that it made more sense, I had that there. Then I went ahead and determined the matrix itself. So this is a parameter. You essentially have to define these parameters just like we did up here with the outer margin. We're going to go ahead and do it inside the matrix. So these two numbers in an array are for rows and columns. So if you remember seeing, and we'll look at again in just a moment, the plot that was over here, there was one graph. I believe there was one graph here, and one graph here. So how do we order those in the infographic in a coding way that makes sense to the computer so that it gives us things in the places that we want. And in order for us to do that, they're also ordered just like the outside of the border is ordered. So the top left is 1, the top right is 2, the bottom left is 3, and the bottom right is 4. So when we go to number where we want to place each chart or each graph, we will use those numbers. And I've kind of denoted that here, so you'll see. So essentially, we want to use parameters for rows, or MF row, which it has to do with multiple figures. So there's a code that's MF row and one that's MF COL or MF column. And you can use either one of those, but essentially because this is MF row, it's row, comma, column. And so I want to have 2 rows and 2 columns so that I have space for my 1, 2, and 3 objects. So when I go ahead and get started, I start with box 1 because in RStudio it matters what order you place things in. And if you remember, I said it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you have to play, if you're using 4 objects, that is. So Matt says sounds good. If you go ahead and start with box 1, which is the top one, we'll go ahead, Stephen asked us to do a vertical bar plot there. So I created this counts variable just like I did before for the bar plot I used in the past. I want it to be a table using this QRPEL data set that we mentioned earlier. The family that we use, or the variable that we want to use, is this regional ID. And the reason that we're doing that is because we want it to be a vertical bar plot for the number of participants in each region by their region in the United States. So it'll be like a frequency type chart. So, if we look through here, bar plot counts is that variable we just created. Main is the title, so number of participants from each region. I added here, I had some issues with my titles being too long. And they were getting cut off because essentially we're putting 2 graphs along this area here. So this CEX main allows me to shrink the size of that text, and so I have it at 0.8. And then I added some labels. So my Y label is number of participants and my X label is region of the United States. And then I added some labels to the bars themselves. So I added West, Midwest, North, and South in the order that they were listed in the data set. So 1 was West, 2 Midwest, 3 North, and 4 South. And that allowed me to kind of, not just look at numbers, but actually say, okay, this region has this many people. And then we did one more parameter for the margins, just like we did the parameter for the outer margin up here. The conventional sizing used in RStudio is this here. So it would be your bottom would be 5.1, your left side would be 4.1, your top would be 3, and your top would be 4.1 and your side would be 2.1. And that makes sense. It sounds confusing because 5.1 versus 2.1, why would the left side, why would the bottom be 5.1 and the left side be 4.1, but then the right side is 2.1? Well, if you think about where axes are on a graph, they're usually on the bottom and the left. And so they give more space there so that we have room for our labels. So if we want to go ahead and run this, just so you have some idea of what this plot looks like, so that we just talked about it, we'll go ahead and run that just as a regular graph. So you can see what I'm saying here with, it shows me, okay, the North has 50 individuals approximately. I have a title here. I shrunk it down a little bit so that when it's with the other graphs in the infographic, it has space, and it has all the information that I want. So I'll go ahead and get rid of that. And you could just clear it, but I really like this feature, especially when I have a lot of things in there. So then we'll move back down. When actually I can go ahead and run it and show you with the matrix. So when I run it in the matrix with just that one box filled out, it goes ahead and puts it in this box 1 that I remember. If you remember, I denoted as box 1. This is the first one it's always going to place it here in the upper left-hand corner for a four box infographic. So we go ahead and have that. And we'll go ahead and talk through this histogram. So we created a histogram from this QRPEL file family. Age is the variable of interest. I used breaks equals 10. Breaks were the number of breaks between the histogram itself. So if you think about a histogram, and I can go ahead and run this so I can give you some idea of what I'm talking about. Let's clear this and we'll run the first two together so you see them. If you think about a histogram, there's a bunch of different boxes that show the distribution. Well, that didn't work, did it? Oh, see, and I selected these two, and it only ran the second one because I forgot to select this determine matrix row and column, which is actually good because it shows you how important it is to select the correct things to run. So let's try this again. I'm going to highlight both first boxes and the matrix and run it. So now you can see. So the histogram allows me to see kind of a distribution in terms of, you know, where people are at. So in this instance, I use 10 breaks, which means there are 10 breaks among the distribution. So like each divider here is considered a break. So if you notice, there are probably 11 boxes and 10 breaks. And that was just for simplicity for me. I didn't want it to be so teeny tiny that you couldn't even decipher what the numbers were or where they were at on the frequency line. And I wanted it to be kind of complementary to this box over here just for aesthetics reasons. So that's why I decided on 10. You can choose any number you like. I had a Y label, which is gender. I had an X label that was frequency. This here is my X limit. I had to add this, and it'll make a lot of sense in a minute when I talk about my other graph down here. But Stephen had a requirement for us that he wanted our X-axes to match the top and bottom here, in boxes 2 and 4. So in order for that to happen, I decided on 50 because it was the most logical number that matched both graphs and complemented one another and didn't lose any explanatory value by using that number. So that's why I chose that. That's this X limit because it cuts off at 50, as you can see here. Then I have a title, which is the main equals gender identification. I have another title sizing change, so that CEX main, I shrunk it down to the same size as this one here. Even though it doesn't fill up the whole space, I just wanted them to be consistent. And then I use the same parameters for margins as I did before, the same default margins that I found online. So that's how we got to there. If you notice, box 3 is empty, and that is because plot.new skips a position. And in order for that to happen, I'm sorry, I think I just recorded a whole lot of my recording on a text or Siri or something because I just got really confused. Anyway, sorry about that, Apple Watch. So what I was saying before is box 3 is empty, plot.new is what skips a position. So since this is position 3, we run this plot.new and we run it in order, make sure that we run it in order. So we run it in succession with box 1, box 2, and box 3. It will be blank. So we'll come back to that and show you once we have a box 4 so that you can actually see that it intentionally skipped a spot. And then the third plot he wanted us to do is this density plot. We accessed that SM package from before. We want to create some value labels. So I used higher this time. So I created this function called higher. And in order to do that, I took factors from my dataset QRPEL. I used the variable current higher, and what that is are you currently in a hiring decision-making process? Are you involved in that? So do you have a say in hiring decisions? There are 3 levels in that, and so that's why it's levels equals 1, 2, and 3 in order. Those labels are I have some say, I have all say, and I have no say. If you remember, Stephen pointed out that he didn't understand that logic, but that's just how they were numbered in Qualtrics, and that's how I pulled them down. Next, we have plot densities. So again, we're going to do this plot density just like last time, using that file QRPEL. We're going to use experience as well as current hire. Labels are year's experience. We have another limit just like before of 50 so that they match. I'll show you in just a moment. And then I added this title here so that we could make sure that that title size was the same as before. Then we want to add a legend with color. So this color fill that that uses these levels with various colors in order, and it uses our variable higher f, if you remember, that we created here. It uses the 1, 2, and 3, the some say, all say, and no say from there in order to fill the colors of the legend. Then we create the legend. Locator means that we can choose the spot that we want the key to be in, and I'll show you that in just a moment. And then, of course, we have levels and the color fill. For that legend, I added a title to the legend, hiring power. I decreased the size of that font, and the size of, the size of the font and the size of the box. And then let's go ahead and run that and show that with, actually, hold on, let me clear everything off. So we clear that so that our space is totally good to go. So we'll highlight all the way up to there. So if you remember, we have some sizing room up here. I'll show you why in just a moment. You see that the third spot is blank, and then the fourth spot has a cross on it. So I'm going to click that, and that places my hiring power thing. And if you can see, I decreased the size a little bit because it kept cutting off the graph, and it didn't look very pretty. So I went ahead and shrunk it, added a title to the key so that we knew what some say, no say, and all say meant. And I made sure that all of these titles matched. And if you can see here, just like we noticed, let me see, here the X limit, I went ahead and matched those 50 and 50. So, and then just at the end, I decided that I wanted a title because these three graphs, you look at them and you say years experience, gender, and region. Well, what are those, how are those related? So I went ahead and added a title. I made it blue for fun. Not that that's much more descriptive, but just so that you know how to do that, it's this M-text. You can add a text. It's regional infographic. It's an outer margin. It's in the outer margin, and so that's why it says outer is true and the color is blue. And so then down here, to copy it to a PDF file, I use this dev print. That is a function that essentially copies the plot to a PDF file, and so then I exported that. Another way that you can do that is by hitting export, save as PDF, and doing it this way. And then to reset it to default is this par def par. So hopefully you've enjoyed this. If you notice one other thing, these two are not showing up, but if you zoom out, they do show up, so no worries there. Thanks for listening.